The snow-capped mountains seemed to touch the heavens, majestic and indifferent to the tiny figure struggling along the narrow trail below. Zoe Matthews clutched her lightweight jacket tighter against the biting wind, her knuckles white with desperation as dark clouds gathered overhead. Her rental car sat useless 2 miles back, its front wheel hanging precariously over the edge of a ravine after she'd swerved to avoid a deer. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, stinging her wind-burned cheeks, Zoe knew with terrifying certainty that she was utterly, completely lost in the vast wilderness of the North Cascades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Just breathe, she whispered to herself, the mantra doing little to calm her racing heart as thunder cracked overhead. Her phone had died hours ago, the battery drained from fruitless attempts to find a signal in this remote corner of Washington state. The hiking trail that had seemed so clearly marked on her tourist map had disappeared beneath a carpet of pine needles and rocks, leaving her to wander aimlessly as daylight faded rapidly behind the gathering storm. This wasn't how her carefully planned solo vacation was supposed to go. After 3 years of building her graphic design business in Seattle, working 16-hour days and sacrificing everything for success, Zoe had finally allowed herself 2 weeks of freedom. A chance to decompress, to find perspective in nature before returning to the crushing pressure of client deadlines and corporate demands. Now, as rain began to fall in earnest, soaking through her woefully inadequate clothing, that decision seemed like the height of urban naivete. The distant howl of what might have been a wolf sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Night in the mountains would bring freezing conditions, and her lightweight hiking gear offered little protection against the elements. Hypothermia was a real possibility, a fact she knew from the wilderness survival books she'd skimmed before this trip. Books that now seemed absurdly inadequate preparation for the reality she faced. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing a steep drop to her right that she hadn't realized she'd been skirting. Zoe gasped, stepping back quickly, her foot slipping on wet pine needles. She tumbled backward, a scream caught in her throat as she braced for impact with the hard ground. Instead, strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Careful there," a deep voice rumbled behind her. "That's a 100-foot drop you nearly danced off of." Zoe whirled around, heart hammering against her ribs, to find herself face to face with a tall man in a weathered forest green jacket. Rain dripped from the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, his face partially shadowed beneath it. Her city instinct screamed danger, a stranger in the wilderness, but her more immediate peril made that concern secondary. "Who?" she began, but was cut off by another deafening crack of thunder. The man gestured toward a barely visible path through the dense trees. "Questions later," he said firmly. "Storm's getting worse. My cabin's half a mile east. Unless you've got a better shelter in mind?" The rain was coming down in sheets now, plastering Zoe's dark hair to her face and neck. She hesitated only briefly before nodding, allowing the stranger to lead the way through the increasingly treacherous terrain. What choice did she have? Stay and face certain hypothermia, or follow this unknown man to potential safety? They moved swiftly through the forest, the man occasionally reaching back to steady her when she stumbled on the slippery path. Despite her athletic build, maintained through rigorous morning runs and weekend yoga classes, Zoe found herself struggling to keep pace, her city-trained lungs burning in the thin mountain air. "Almost there," he called over his shoulder, voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Just beyond that ridge." Zoe squinted through the rain, making out the dark silhouette of what appeared to be a substantial log. The cabin nestled against the mountainside. Smoke curled from its stone chimney despite the storm, promising warmth that made her quicken her pace. The cabin's porch offered immediate relief from the driving rain. The man stomped his boots on the rough-hewn welcome mat before pushing open the heavy wooden door. Golden light spilled out, along with a wave of blessed heat that made Zoe's frozen cheeks tingle painfully. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "You're safe now." The interior of the cabin was unexpectedly spacious, with exposed beam ceilings and walls lined with bookshelves. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, crackling with a robust fire that cast dancing shadows across the rustic furniture. The scent of something savory simmering on the cast-iron stove made Zoe's empty stomach clench with sudden hunger. "I'm Ethan," the man said, removing his hat to reveal a face that seemed carved from the same rugged material as the mountains themselves. Deep-set eyes, the color of pine resin, assessed her with quiet intensity. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about the weathered lines around his eyes, the salt and pepper beard that framed a mouth more accustomed to silence than small talk. "Ethan Blackwood." "Zoe Matthews," she replied, suddenly aware of how she must look, soaked to the skin, makeup long since washed away, hair a tangled mess. "I thank you for helping me." Ethan nodded once, hanging his dripping jacket on a peg by the door. "Got yourself turned around on the North Trail, I'm guessing. It happens. Not many markers up that way." He crossed to a chest near the fireplace and pulled out a thick woolen blanket. "Here, you need to get warm. Bathroom's through there if you want to change. I've got some clothes might fit you well enough." The practicality of his manner put Zoe slightly more at ease, though wariness remained. 3 years in Seattle's corporate jungle had taught her to question kindness, to look for the ulterior motive behind every helpful gesture. But as another violent shiver racked her body, she accepted both the blanket and the bundle of clothing he retrieved from a cedar chest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The bathroom was small, but surprisingly modern, with running water and electric lights powered by what must be a generator. Zoe peeled off her sodden clothes, dried herself with a rough but clean towel, and pulled on the offered garments, a soft flannel shirt that hung to her knees and thick wool socks. The pants he'd provided were hopelessly large, so she rolled them at the waist and ankles, creating a look that would have been comical under different circumstances. When she emerged, Ethan was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Better?" Zoe nodded, clutching the blanket around her shoulders despite the cabin's warmth. "Much. Thank you." She hesitated, unsure of the protocol for being rescued by a mountain stranger. I need to get back to civilization. My car went off the road about 3 miles west of here, and I need to call for a tow truck and—" "Not happening tonight," Ethan interrupted, gesturing toward the windows where rain lashed against the glass with renewed fury. "Storm's turned into a real howler. Roads'll be washed out by now. Phone lines too, probably. But you have to eat," he said firmly, ladling what appeared to be venison stew into a ceramic bowl. "Then rest. Nothing's getting fixed in this weather, and no one's coming up the mountain tonight." The realization that she was effectively stranded with this stranger sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Zoe. She glanced around the cabin, noting its solitary nature, the hunting rifles mounted on one wall, the absence of any signs of family or companions. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm not going to hurt you, city girl. Been living up here for 12 years. Ranger Station knows me. I help out with search and rescue sometimes." He set the bowl on a rough-hewn table, along with a chunk of homemade bread. "Eat. You need the calories after being out in that cold." The simple logic of his words, combined with the insistent growling of her stomach, won out. Zoe sat cautiously at the table, taking a tentative spoonful of the stew. The rich flavor exploded on her tongue, game meat slow-cooked with root vegetables and herbs she couldn't identify, but that somehow tasted of the forest itself. "This is incredible," she admitted, surprised by the culinary skill of this taciturn mountain man. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Been cooking for myself a long time. You learn or you starve." He filled a bowl for himself and sat across from her, his movements economical, nothing wasted. "Do you live here alone?" Zoe asked, immediately regretting the question that highlighted her vulnerability. Ethan nodded, breaking off a piece of bread. "Just me and the mountains. And occasional lost hikers." "I'm not lost," Zoe protested automatically. "I'm just temporarily disoriented." This time, his smile was unmistakable, transforming his severe features into something unexpectedly appealing. "That what they call it in Seattle?" Zoe blinked. "How did you know I'm from Seattle?" He shrugged, gesturing toward her with his spoon. "Your boots? Expensive hiking gear, barely broken in. That watch. Solar-powered, latest model. The way you talk. And you've got that look." "What look?" "Like you're trying to figure out how to get a cell signal or Wi-Fi password up here." His assessment was so accurate it stung. "Tech industry, I'm guessing? One of those glass tower companies." "Graphic designer," Zoe admitted. "I have my own firm. Small, but growing." The words came out sounding defensive, even to her own ears, as if she needed to justify her urban existence to this man who clearly had no interest in such things. Ethan merely nodded, focusing on his food. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the relentless pounding of rain on the roof. Zoe found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the capable hands that had saved her from falling, the quiet self-sufficiency evident in everything from his posture to the well-maintained cabin. "You build this place yourself?" she asked, gesturing to the solid walls around them. "Most of it. Expanded on an old hunter's cabin that was here when I bought the land. It's not what I expected." Zoe glanced around at the bookshelves, noting titles on everything from philosophy to astronomy. "I mean, it's rustic, but not the Unabomber shack you were picturing?" Ethan's eyebrow raised slightly, amusement evident in his tone. Zoe felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't say that. Didn't have to." He rose, taking their empty bowls to a basin near the small kitchen area. "People see the beard in the mountains and make assumptions." His words struck uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't she done exactly that? Categorized him as some backwoods recluse the moment she'd seen him, despite the evidence of intelligence and capability all around her? "Why do you live up here?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. So far from everything? Ethan was quiet for so long that Zoe thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had a depth that suggested the question touched on something fundamental. "I was a trauma surgeon. Boston General. 14 years. He kept his back to her, hands busy with washing the dishes. Saved a lot of lives. Lost some too. After a while, I couldn't tell the difference between the ones I saved and the ones I lost. They all blurred together. Faces, bodies, blood. I stopped sleeping. Started drinking." Zoe remained silent, sensing that interrupting would close whatever door had unexpectedly opened. "One night, I almost killed a patient. What if the resident hadn't caught my mistake?" Ethan turned, drying his hands on a towel, his expression grave. "I left the next day. Drove west until I couldn't drive anymore. Found this place. Been here ever since." The simple story contained volumes of pain and redemption that Zoe couldn't begin to unpack. She thought of her own career anxieties, the clients who complained about font choices, the competitors who undercut her prices, and felt suddenly shallow. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "Saving lives?" Something flashed in Ethan's eyes. Regret, perhaps, or old grief. "Sometimes. But I've found other ways to be useful up here. The forest has its own rhythms, its own ways of teaching you what matters." Thunder crashed outside, as if punctuating his words. The lights flickered momentarily, and Ethan moved to add another log to the fire. "Storm's settling in for the night," he observed. "You should get some rest. You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here." Zoe wanted to protest, to insist she take the couch visible in the corner, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves. The warmth of the cabin, the hearty meal, and the adrenaline crash from her near disaster had left her barely able to keep her eyes open. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Ethan nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "The mountains aren't forgiving of mistakes, Zoe, but they reward respect and patience. Remember that when you head back down." The statement felt loaded with meaning beyond its surface advice. Zoe nodded, unsure how to respond, and made her way to the bedroom he'd indicated. Unlike the rustic main room, the bedroom held surprising touches of refinement. A handcrafted quilt on the bed, watercolor paintings of local landscapes on the walls, a small bookshelf filled with poetry collections. Another facet of this enigmatic man that defied easy categorization. As Zoe slipped between cool sheets that smelled of cedar and pine, the storm's fury seemed to intensify, rattling the windows in their frames. Yet instead of fear, she felt an unexpected sense of security. Outside was chaos and danger, but here, in this sturdy cabin built by a surgeon's precise hands, she was safe. Her last thought before drifting into exhausted sleep was that in less than 12 hours, her perception of safety had been completely inverted. In Seattle, safety meant security systems and crowded streets. Here, in the wilderness she'd feared, safety had come in the form of a stranger, whose entire existence challenged everything she thought she valued. Morning arrived with startling brilliance, sunlight streaming through the cabin's windows, as if the previous night's tempest had been nothing but a dream. Zoe woke disoriented, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings before memory rushed back. The storm. The mountainside. Ethan. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry, and folded neatly outside the bedroom door. The cabin was quiet, no sign of her rescuer in the main room, where embers still glowed in the fireplace. A note on the table, written in surprisingly elegant handwriting, explained his absence. Gone to check the road conditions. Coffee in the pot. Help yourself to breakfast. -E. The domesticity of the gesture struck Zoe as oddly touching. She poured herself coffee from the enamel pot on the stove, savoring the rich, dark brew as she moved to the cabin's front windows. The transformation outside was breathtaking. What had been a threatening landscape of shadows and dangers now revealed itself as a paradise of rugged beauty. Sunlight glinted off wet pine needles, turning the forest into a tapestry of emerald and gold. Beyond the trees, snow-capped peaks rose against a sky so intensely blue, it seemed almost artificial. For the first time, Zoe understood what might draw someone to this isolated existence. The raw magnificence of it, the primordial sense of being part of something vaster and more enduring than human concerns, stirred something unexpected within her. The sound of boots on the porch preceded Ethan's return. He entered with a gust of fresh air, his expression sober. "Roads washed out in 3 places between here and where you left your car," he announced without preamble. "And your car's in worse shape than you probably realize. That ravine edge gave way more overnight. Vehicles halfway down the slope now." Zoe's heart sank. "So I'm stuck here? For how long?" "Ranger station sending a crew, but with the storm damage throughout the park, it'll be at least 3 days before they get to this section." He hung his jacket by the door, studying her reaction. "Problem?" 3 days in the wilderness, cut off from her clients, her emails, her carefully scheduled life. 3 days with this enigmatic stranger who seemed to embody everything she'd spent her adult life running from: solitude, simplicity, detachment from the digital world that was her livelihood. "I have meetings," she said weakly. "Deadlines. People expecting things from me." Ethan shrugged, the gesture neither sympathetic nor dismissive. "Mountains don't care about deadlines. Neither does gravity or weather." He moved to the stove, adding fresh wood to the firebox beneath. "Your choice is pretty simple. Stress about things you can't change, or adapt to what is." The bluntness of his assessment hit Zoe like a physical blow. In Seattle, there were always workarounds, always ways to bend reality, to accommodate professional commitments. Out here, those rules simply didn't apply. "I need to let people know I'm alive, at least," she said, running a hand through her tangled hair. "My assistant will be worried when I don't check in." "We can hike to Lookout Point after breakfast," Ethan offered. "Sometimes you can get a signal there, if the atmospheric conditions are right." It was a concession, a small bridge between their worlds. Zoe nodded gratefully. "Thank you." Breakfast was simple but hearty. Eggs from chickens Zoe hadn't yet seen, sourdough toast, and wild berries preserved from the previous summer. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than the previous night. less wary, more contemplative. Afterward, true to his word, Ethan led her on a hike to Lookout Point, a rocky outcropping that offered sweeping views of the valley below. The trail was steep in places, challenging even for Zoe's city-trained fitness level, but Ethan set a pace that was demanding without being punishing. The trick to these mountains, he explained when they paused for water, is to move with them, not against them. Follow the natural contours. Respect what they're telling you. Zoe found herself listening not just to his words, but to the unspoken philosophy behind them. How long had it been since she'd truly listened to anything? In Seattle, she was always half attending, one ear on a client call while checking emails, one eye on a design while messaging her assistant. Here, with no distractions beyond the wind in the pines and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead, she found herself fully present in a way that felt almost forgotten. At Lookout Point, miracle of miracles, her phone found a single bar of service when held at precisely the right angle. Enough to send a brief text to her assistant, explaining her situation and postponing her meetings. The relief of making contact was tempered by a strange reluctance to reconnect with the world she'd left behind. "Got through?" Ethan asked, standing a respectful distance away, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks. "Yes, though Katie, my assistant, probably thinks I've lost my mind. 3 days off the grid isn't exactly my style." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Ethan's weathered features. "Might do you good. Most people are overfed on information and starved for wisdom." The observation, delivered without judgment, struck Zoe as profoundly true. When had she last had time to think, truly think, without the constant bombardment of notifications, calls, and urgent client requests? "Did it help you?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Coming up here, disconnecting from everything?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as if reading messages in the landscape that were invisible to her. "It didn't fix what was broken," he finally said, "but it gave me space to see what needed fixing." On the hike back to the cabin, Zoe found herself noticing details she'd missed on the way up. The complex patterns of lichen on rock faces, the subtle differences between types of pine trees, the varied birdsong that Ethan could identify without looking up. "Red-tailed hawk," he said, pointing to a distant speck circling above the tree line. "They mate for life. That one's been hunting this territory since before I built the cabin." "How can you tell it's the same one?" "Pattern of white feathers on the underwing, like a fingerprint." There was unmistakable affection in his voice. "Nature rewards attention." At the cabin, Ethan surprised her by asking if she'd like to learn to chop wood. The request was so unexpected that Zoe laughed, then realized he was serious. I don't think I'd be very good at it." "Not asking you to be good, just asking if you want to learn." He held out an axe, handle first. "Useful skill, never know when you might need it." The challenge in his eyes was impossible to resist. Zoe took the axe, surprised by its weight. Under Ethan's patient instruction, she learned to position the log, to stand with proper footing, to swing with her body rather than just her arms. Her first attempts were clumsy, the axe glancing off the wood without splitting it, but on her 7th try, the log split cleanly down the middle, the crack of cleaving wood surprisingly satisfying. "Not bad," Ethan commented, the understatement somehow worth more than effusive praise might have been from someone else. Again. By the time they'd built up a respectable pile of split wood, Zoe's arms trembled with exertion and sweat dampened her borrowed flannel shirt, despite the cool mountain air. Yet she felt oddly exhilarated. There was something primal and deeply satisfying about the work, tangible in a way that digital design never was, with immediate, visible results. "How does it feel?" Ethan asked as they carried armloads of split wood to stack against the cabin wall. "Like I actually accomplished something real," Zoe admitted. "In Seattle, I can work all day and have nothing to show for it but pixels on a screen." Ethan nodded, unsurprised. "That's why I build things now. Furniture, additions to the cabin, things I can touch." He glanced at her with unexpected perception. "Your work, it matters to people?" The question caught Zoe off guard. Did her work matter? She created branding for startups, interfaces for apps that people used for a few months before the next trend came along, logos that companies discarded during the next rebranding cycle. It pays well, she said finally. It challenges me creatively, but I don't know if it matters, not in any lasting way. Ethan didn't press the point, but his silence felt like its own kind of commentary. As the day progressed, he showed her other aspects of his self-sufficient lifestyle. The greenhouse where he grew vegetables even through the harsh mountain winters, the solar panels that supplemented the generator's power, the workshop where he crafted furniture from fallen trees. "You really built all this yourself?" Zoe asked, running her fingers over a bookshelf of stunning craftsmanship, the dovetail joints fitting together with surgical precision. "Had time," Ethan replied simply, "and motivation. Up here, if you want something, you either make it or learn to live without it." The philosophy was so contrary to everything Zoe had built her life around. The convenience of instant delivery, the constant upgrade cycle, the disposability of objects and sometimes relationships. Yet she couldn't deny the evident satisfaction Ethan took in his created world, or the quality of life he'd carved from this seemingly harsh environment. That evening, as they shared a meal of trout Ethan had caught in a nearby stream, Zoe found herself opening up about her own life. The relentless pressure of client expectations, the competitive nature of her industry, the relationships sacrificed on the altar of career advancement. "I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years," she admitted. "This trip was supposed to be 2 weeks of finding myself, or whatever that Instagram cliché is. Instead, I nearly died on a mountain. Yet here you are," Ethan observed. "Finding yourself after all, just not the way you planned." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Was that what was happening? This enforced pause, this radical removal from everything familiar, was it exactly what she'd been seeking without realizing it? As night fell and they sat before the fire, Zoe found herself asking the question that had been forming since she'd learned of his former life. "Do you ever think about going back? To medicine, I mean?" Ethan's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his posture. "Every day," he admitted quietly. "And never. The skills are still here." He flexed his surgeon's hands, strong now from years of physical labor, but still possessing that unmistakable dexterity. But the person who used them is gone. "People change," Zoe suggested. "They heal. Some wounds don't heal. They just become part of you." He stoked the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "The mountains taught me that. To carry what happened without letting it define every step forward." The conversation lingered in Zoe's mind as she retired to the bedroom that night. She thought of her own carefully constructed identity, successful entrepreneur, driven professional, urban sophisticate, and wondered for the first time how much of it was authentic, and how much was armor against deeper truths she'd been avoiding. Sleep came slowly, her thoughts chasing themselves in circles. But when it finally claimed her, it was deeper and more restful than any she could remember in recent years. The second day brought new revelations. Ethan showed her how to identify edible plants in the forest, how to move quietly enough to observe deer at close range, how to read weather patterns and cloud formations. Simple knowledge that had once been commonplace, now exotic to her city-trained sensibilities. People think survival out here is about dramatic things, fighting off bears or building shelter in a blizzard, Ethan explained as they harvested wild mushrooms for that evening's meal. But mostly it's about paying attention, noticing small details, being patient. Zoe thought of her life in Seattle, the constant rush, the multitasking, the perpetual sense that there wasn't enough time for anything. Patience had never been her strong suit. Yet here, moving at Ethan's deliberate pace, she found herself noticing things she would have missed entirely before. The subtle difference in texture between poisonous and edible fungi, the almost imperceptible tracks of animals in the forest floor, the changing quality of light as the day progressed. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, as Ethan pointed out a constellation that evening, the stars brilliantly clear in the pollution-free mountain sky. "Books, at first. Trial and error. The rangers helped some, but mostly just watching, year after year." He glanced at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "The mountains will teach you if you're willing to listen." "I'm not sure I know how to listen anymore," Zoe admitted. "Everything in my life is about talking, pitching, selling. Even when I'm quiet, my mind is racing with to-do lists and client problems. That's why you came out here, isn't it? To remember how to listen? The question hung between them, unanswerable, yet somehow essential. Zoe found herself wondering what might happen if she extended her stay beyond the necessary 3 days. What would another week in this place reveal? Another month? What parts of herself, long buried under career ambitions and urban adaptations, might resurface? But even as the thought formed, she recognized its impossibility. Her life, her real life, was waiting in Seattle. Clients, deadlines, the business she'd built from nothing. She couldn't simply walk away, no matter how seductive the alternative might momentarily seem. The third day dawned with a bittersweet quality, both Zoe and Ethan aware that the ranger crew would likely reach them by evening. They spent the morning in companionable activities. Zoe helping to harvest vegetables from the greenhouse, Ethan teaching her to build a fire from scratch. Useful skill even in the city, he commented as she successfully coaxed a small flame from tinder. Power goes out sometimes, even in Seattle. Is that your subtle way of suggesting I should be more prepared? Zoe asked, smiling despite herself. Just saying that worlds intersect more than we pretend they do. He sat back on his heels, watching her tend the small fire. The skills that serve you here might serve you there too. Patience, attention, self-reliance. The observation lingered as they hiked to a nearby waterfall in the afternoon, a final expedition before her inevitable return to civilization. The cascade was magnificent, water plunging over ancient stone into a pool of impossible clarity. Local legend says drinking from that pool grants clarity of purpose, Ethan remarked as they sat on sun-warmed rocks beside the falls. Tribal stories about vision quests and finding one's true path. Do you believe that? Zoe asked, curious about this rare mention of the mystical from her pragmatic host. Ethan shrugged. I believe we find meaning where we seek it, and sometimes in places we don't. He glanced at her with unexpected directness. What will you take back with you, Zoe? Besides a cautionary tale about mountain driving. The question caught her off guard. What would she take back? These 3 days had shaken something fundamental in her perspective, but was it merely the temporary disruption of routine, or something more lasting? I don't know, she answered honestly. Part of me feels like I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in years, but another part knows how easy it is to get sucked back into old patterns once you're surrounded by them again. Ethan nodded, understanding evident in his expression. Change isn't about dramatic gestures. It's about small choices, made consistently. Chopping wood, one log at a time. The radio crackled to life late that afternoon. The ranger crew reporting they'd cleared the road and would reach the cabin within the hour. The news should have brought nothing but relief, yet Zoe felt an unexpected pang of regret as she gathered her few belongings. I don't know how to thank you, she said as they waited on the porch, the lengthening shadows marking the approach of evening. For saving my life. For everything else. Ethan considered her words, his expression thoughtful. No thanks needed. But if you want to repay the favor, remember what the mountains taught you. Don't let it fade when you go back. I'll try. The promise felt simultaneously impossible and essential. Here, Ethan handed her a small wooden object, a carving of a hawk in flight, its wings extended, details rendered with extraordinary precision. Something tangible, to remind you. The gesture touched Zoe deeply. She closed her fingers around the carving, feeling the smooth grain of the wood, the careful craftsmanship. I'll keep it on my desk, to remind me to pay attention. The sound of vehicles approaching broke the moment. 2 Forest Service trucks appeared around the bend in the road, their official markings catching the late afternoon sun. Your ride, Ethan observed, something unreadable flickering across his features. As the Rangers helped load her belongings into their truck, Zoe found herself reluctant to say the final goodbye. What did one say to a person who had not only saved their life, but potentially changed its course? Will you be all right up here? She asked, suddenly concerned about his solitude in a way she hadn't been before. All alone? A small smile touched Ethan's lips. I'm not alone, just solitary. There's a difference. Still, maybe I could. Zoe hesitated, uncertain what she was offering. To visit? To maintain contact? Both seemed simultaneously too much and not enough. The mountains will be here, Ethan said simply. If you ever need them again. It wasn't until the trucks were winding their way down the mountain road, the cabin disappearing from view around a bend, that Zoe realized he had given her permission to return without extracting a promise she might not keep. One final lesson in the wisdom of the wilderness, holding on loosely, allowing life to unfold on its own terms. As the forest thinned and the first signs of civilization appeared, power lines, paved roads, eventually the small ranger station where her rental car company had been contacted, Zoe felt herself straddling two worlds. The woman who had stumbled terrified through the storm 3 days ago was not the same one returning now, yet her old life waited unchanged, unaware of the transformation that had occurred. You were lucky, the ranger driving the truck commented as they approached the outpost. Ethan doesn't take to many people. Keeps to himself most of the time. He saved my life, Zoe said simply. The ranger nodded. He's good at that. Saving lives in one way or another. The observation lingered as Zoe completed the practicalities of return. Paperwork for the damaged rental car, arrangements for transportation back to Seattle, the first check of hundreds of accumulated emails and messages on her newly charged phone. Among them was one from her biggest client, threatening to take their business elsewhere if their project wasn't prioritized immediately. 6 months ago, the message would have sent her into a panic of people-pleasing responses. Now, studying it with newfound perspective, Zoe recognized the manipulation for what it was. With surprising calm, she composed a response that was professional but firm, outlining reasonable expectations and boundaries, offering solutions without sacrificing her integrity. Then, setting her phone aside, she took out Ethan's carving, running her fingers over the hawk's outstretched wings. One log at a time, she murmured to herself, a smile touching her lips as she gazed toward the mountains that had nearly claimed her life, and in not doing so had given her something immeasurably precious instead. A chance to begin again, eyes open, attention focused on what truly mattered. Not just survival, but a life worth surviving for. Seattle's skyline emerged through the morning mist as Zoe's cab approached the city, glass towers reflecting the pale sunlight like beacons, calling her back to the life she'd left behind. 2 weeks had passed since her rescue from the mountains, 2 weeks of readjustment that felt like stepping into shoes that no longer quite fit her feet. Home sweet home, the driver commented as they pulled up to her downtown apartment building. The doorman rushed to help with her bags, his familiar greeting washing over her as she stared up at the sleek high-rise she'd once been so proud to call home. Welcome back, Ms. Matthews. Shall I have these sent up? Yes, thank you, Thomas. Zoe handed him a generous tip, a habit that hadn't changed despite everything else that had. The elevator ascended silently, its mirrored walls reflecting a woman Zoe barely recognized. Her skin sun-kissed from mountain days, her posture somehow different, more grounded. Her apartment looked exactly as she'd left it. Minimalist, expensively furnished, impeccably clean, thanks to the service that came twice weekly, yet something felt off, as if she were walking through a carefully curated museum exhibit of her former life. Zoe moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been the apartment's main selling point 3 years ago. The view was spectacular. Elliott Bay glittering in the distance, the bustling city spread below like a living organism, so different from the vast wilderness vistas she'd woken to in Ethan's cabin. The wooden hawk sat on her otherwise empty coffee table, where she'd placed it after unpacking. The carving seemed out of place among the chrome and glass surfaces of her urban sanctuary, yet somehow more authentic than everything else surrounding it. Her phone chimed with calendar reminders, the steady stream of meetings, deadlines, and client calls that would begin tomorrow morning. Reality reasserting itself, demanding her attention. Zoe took a deep breath, steeling herself for the plunge back into the world she'd built so carefully. One log at a time, she whispered to herself, touching the wooden hawk briefly before turning to prepare for what lay ahead. The offices of Matthews' design studio occupied half a floor in a trendy converted warehouse in Pioneer Square. Exposed brick, original hardwood floors, and industrial lighting created exactly the creative yet professional atmosphere Zoe had envisioned when leasing the space 18 months ago. Pride mingled with apprehension as she pushed open the glass doors the next morning, bracing for the onslaught of urgent matters that would have accumulated during her absence. "Oh my God, she lives!" Katie, her assistant, sprung from her desk with surprising athleticism, enveloping Zoe in a tight hug that smelled of coffee and expensive perfume. "We were taking bets on whether you'd been eaten by bears or just decided to join a commune." Zoe laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "No bears. No commune. Just a very educational detour." "Well, you look different." Katie stepped back, studying her boss with narrowed eyes. "Good different. Like you actually relaxed for once in your life." "Almost dying tends to put things in perspective," Zoe quipped, though the lightness in her tone couldn't quite mask the truth behind the words. Katie's expression sobered. "That bad, huh? Let's just say I got a crash course in what really matters." Zoe glanced around the office where her small team was pretending not to watch their reunion. "But I'm back now. What disaster fires need putting out first?" "Actually," Katie said, following Zoe to her glass-walled office, "things are under control. Mostly. I rescheduled the Wilson pitch for next week, pushed back the deadline on the Apex project, and told Granger they could take their impossible timeline and shove it." Zoe stopped in her tracks, turning to stare at her assistant. "You told Granger, our biggest client, to shove it?" Katie grinned, unrepentant. "In more professional terms, obviously. But yeah, they were being unreasonable, and you weren't here to do your usual self-sacrificing thing where you kill yourself to meet their ridiculous demands." The old Zoe would have been horrified. The new Zoe, the one who had split logs with her own hands and watched eagles soar over mountain peaks, felt an unexpected surge of pride in her young assistant's backbone. "And they didn't fire us? Turns out when you set boundaries, people actually respect them. Who knew?" Katie handed over a stack of folders. "These need your attention today. The rest can wait." As Katie turned to leave, Zoe called after her, "Hey, Katie, good job." "Really?" The surprise that flashed across her assistant's face made Zoe wonder how rarely she had offered genuine praise before. The morning passed in a blur of catching up. Emails responded to, project updates reviewed, calls returned. On the surface, Zoe slipped back into her role with practiced ease. Yet something fundamental had shifted in her approach. Where once she would have responded immediately to every client demand, now she found herself pausing, evaluating whether the urgency was real or manufactured. By lunchtime, she had cleared her most pressing responsibilities and found herself with a rare moment of stillness. Her gaze fell on the wooden hawk she'd placed on her desk that morning. Beside it sat her phone, buzzing with yet another notification. The contrast between the handcrafted art and the mass-produced technology seemed suddenly symbolic of the choice she faced between the life she had built and the one she had glimpsed in those 3 transformative days. On impulse, Zoe picked up her phone and searched for Ethan Blackwood's surge in Boston. The results confirmed what little he had told her. Articles from medical journals listing his contributions to trauma surgery, a brief mention in a hospital newsletter about his unexpected departure, nothing after that. It was as if he had simply vanished from the digital world, leaving no trace beyond his professional legacy. "Zoe?" Michael Chen, her lead designer, appeared in the doorway, interrupting her thoughts. "The team's ordering lunch. You want in?" "Actually," Zoe said, making a sudden decision, "I think I'm going to go out. Get some fresh air." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. Zoe was known for working through lunch, often forgetting to eat entirely. But he simply nodded. "Sure thing. See you at the 2 o'clock. Wouldn't miss it." Outside, Seattle's distinctive blend of sea air and urban energy enveloped her. Zoe walked without a specific destination, allowing her feet to carry her through familiar streets that somehow looked different now. Had the homeless man on the corner always been there? Had that small park always offered such a perfect pocket of green amidst the concrete? She found herself at Pike Place Market, drawn by some unconscious desire for connection to something authentic. Among the vendors selling fresh fish and local produce, Zoe felt a distant echo of the self-sufficiency she'd witnessed in Ethan's mountain existence. These people created with their hands, grew things from the earth, crafted objects meant to last. Zoe purchased a hand-thrown ceramic mug from an elderly woman whose weathered hands reminded her of Ethan's, capable, strong, marked by a lifetime of making rather than consuming. The woman wrapped it carefully, her movements unhurried despite the bustle around her. "Something special about this one," the woman commented, handing over the package. "Has the mountain in it." "The mountain?" the woman gestured vaguely. "Clay from the Cascades, stronger than the valley clay, holds its shape better under fire." The coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't one, left Zoe momentarily speechless. She thanked the woman and continued her wandering, the package tucked carefully into her bag. By the time she returned to the office, something had crystallized within her. Not a complete plan, but the beginning of one. A seed planted in mountain soil that had somehow taken root in urban ground. The afternoon meeting was a creative review for their newest client, a startup developing sustainable technology. As her team presented concepts for the company's branding, Zoe found herself asking questions she never would have considered before her wilderness experience. But what's the actual impact of their product? Does it truly reduce waste, or just shift the problem elsewhere? Are they building something meant to last, or another disposable solution? Her team exchanged glances, unused to this line of questioning from their typically results-focused boss. Their mission statement says they're committed to sustainability, one of the junior designers offered hesitantly. That's marketing language. I want to know what they're actually doing, Zoe pressed. Before we help them tell their story, we should understand if it's a story worth telling. Since when do we care about that? Michael asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. I thought our job was to make them look good, regardless. The question hung in the air, challenging Zoe to articulate the change that had been brewing since her return. She thought of Ethan's words about work that mattered, about the tangible satisfaction of creating something real and necessary. Since now, she said finally, I want us to be more intentional about the clients we take on, the stories we help tell, the impact we have. The room fell silent, her team regarding her with expressions ranging from confusion to intrigue. Does this have something to do with your educational detour? Katie asked, making air quotes around the phrase. Zoe smiled, her fingers unconsciously tracing the grain of her desk. Let's just say I had some time to think about what matters. And I want this studio to matter. Not just survive, but contribute something meaningful. To her surprise, instead of resistance, her declaration was met with cautious enthusiasm. It seemed her team had been harboring similar thoughts, but had assumed such idealism had no place in their competitive industry. So what exactly are you proposing? Michael asked, leaning forward with interest. A shift in direction, not all at once, but gradually, taking on more clients who are creating actual value, being more selective, maybe even developing our own projects that align with values we care about. Like what? Zoe hesitated, the seed of her idea still tender, not quite ready for full exposure. I'm still working that out, but I know it involves connecting people with experiences that wake them up. Remind them what's real. The meeting evolved into something unexpected. A passionate discussion about purpose and meaning in their work that stretched well beyond its scheduled time. When they finally dispersed, Zoe felt both drained and invigorated, as if she'd done a day's physical labor rather than sat in a conference room. The following weeks brought gradual changes to Matthews' design studio. Some clients, sensing the shift in philosophy, took their business elsewhere. Others, intrigued by the new direction, became more invested partners. Zoe found herself saying no to projects that once would have been automatic yeses, creating space for work that aligned with her emerging vision. Each evening, she returned to her apartment and found it increasingly at odds with her changing self. The minimalist decor that had once seemed sophisticated now felt sterile. The convenience of downtown living couldn't compensate for the disconnection from nature, from the rhythms that had briefly ordered her days in the mountains. 1 month after her return, Zoe found herself once again searching for information about Ethan online. This time, she expanded her search, looking into property records for the area where his cabin was located. She told herself it was mere curiosity, a desire to understand the context of her transformative experience. But beneath that rationalization lay a deeper truth she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Her search yielded unexpected results, not just Ethan's property, but adjacent land for sale. Hundreds of acres of wilderness, untouched and pristine, threatened by potential development into vacation homes. The listing described it as a quote, for luxury mountain retreats. Language that made Zoe's stomach turn as she imagined the wilderness she'd come to revere carved into parcels for wealthy weekenders. That night, sleep eluded her. She stood at her window, gazing at the city lights that never fully darkened the night sky, preventing the stars from showing their full glory. The contrast with the profound darkness of the mountain nights, where the Milky Way spread across the heavens in breathtaking clarity, couldn't have been more stark. A plan began to form. Audacious, perhaps irrational, but somehow right in a way few things had felt since her return. The next morning, Zoe called her financial advisor. "I want to liquidate my investments," she said without preamble when he came on the line. "All of them." "Excuse me?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Zoe, we've spent years building your portfolio. What could possibly—" "I'm buying land. In the Cascades." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Is this some kind of midlife crisis?" "You're 34. "It's the opposite of a crisis," Zoe replied with surprising calm. "It's clarity." Against his strenuous objections, Zoe set the process in motion. Her savings, carefully accumulated over years of 60-hour work weeks and frugal personal spending, would just cover the asking price for the land. It was a financial risk unlike any she'd taken before, investing everything in a vision still taking shape. 2 days later, she called a team meeting at the studio. Her employees gathered around the conference table, curious about the unusual all-hands summons. "I'm buying land in the North Cascades," Zoe announced without preamble. "And I want to establish a retreat center there, a place where people like us, creatives, professionals, anyone disconnected from what matters, can go to remember what's real." The silence that greeted her declaration was profound. Katie was the first to speak. "When you said you wanted the studio to matter, you weren't kidding around." "Is this replacing the design business?" Michael asked carefully. "Not replacing. Expanding." Zoe spread out the property maps she'd printed. "We keep doing what we do best. Design, branding, storytelling. But we apply those skills to this new venture as well. Building something that's ours, not just client work." "A retreat center," Katie repeated slowly. "Like yoga and meditation? Like remembering how to split wood and build fires and identify constellations," Zoe corrected. "Like disconnecting from screens long enough to reconnect with something more fundamental." Understanding dawned gradually on their faces as Zoe shared more of her vision, a place that offered not luxury escapism, but authentic engagement with nature and self-sufficiency, a place that taught the lessons she had learned during her 3 days in Ethan's cabin, but in a more accessible form. "This is a big pivot," Michael observed when she had finished. "Not everyone will be on board." "I know," Zoe acknowledged. "And I understand if it's not what you signed up for. But I believe it's the right direction, not just for me, but for the kind of impact we could have." To her surprise, resistance was minimal. Her team, it seemed, had been hungering for purpose as much as she had, without realizing it. By the end of the meeting, initial skepticism had transformed into cautious excitement, with ideas flowing freely about how to approach the new venture. As her team dispersed, energized by possibility, Katie lingered behind. "So," she said, perching on the edge of the conference table, "are you going to tell me about him?" "Him?" Zoe kept her expression neutral, though her heart rate quickened. "The mountain man, who clearly changed your life. Don't think I haven't noticed that wooden bird you keep touching like a talisman." Zoe smiled despite herself. His name is Ethan, and it's complicated. Complicated how? He's married? He's a hermit? He's secretly a billionaire hiding from the world? He's someone who saved my life and showed me a different way to live. That's all. Zoe gathered her papers, avoiding Katie's knowing gaze. And does this someone know you're about to become his neighbor? The question hit its mark. No. And maybe I won't. The land purchase is about preserving the wilderness, not about him. Katie's skepticism was evident. Well, whatever your motivation, I'm excited to see where this goes. It's the first time since I've worked for you that you seem fully alive. The observation lingered as Zoe worked late into the evening, refining the concept for what she had begun to call Clarity Wilderness Retreat. The name was a nod to the pool beside the waterfall and the tribal legends Ethan had mentioned, but also to what she hoped to offer, a clear view, both literally and figuratively, of what truly mattered. As darkness fell over Seattle, Zoe found herself once again at her window, gazing toward the distant mountains invisible beyond the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan was perhaps sitting before his fire, reading by lamplight, unaware that his brief intervention in a stranger's life had set in motion changes neither of them could have anticipated. The thought of seeing him again filled her with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. What would he think of her plan? Would he see it as an intrusion on his solitude, or recognize the genuine respect for the land and its lessons that drove her vision? More importantly, would he remember her as something more than just another lost hiker, another life temporarily intersecting with his own before continuing on its separate path? These questions had no immediate answers, yet they propelled Zoe forward with surprising momentum. Each step, from the initial land purchase agreement to the preliminary architectural sketches for structures that would blend harmoniously with the natural environment, felt like movement towards something authentic, something that mattered in a way her previous achievements never had. 2 months after her return from the mountains, Zoe stood in her increasingly empty apartment, surrounded by boxes. She'd decided to sublet the space rather than sell it outright, a concession to practicality, as the retreat center would take months to become operational. The ceramic mug from Pike Place Market sat on the counter, carefully wrapped and ready for transport to its new home. Ms. Matthews? The moving company supervisor knocked on her open door. We're ready when you are. Zoe nodded, taking one last look at the view that had once represented success to her. The city sprawled below, magnificent in its human ingenuity, yet somehow less compelling than the untamed wilderness that now called to her. I'm ready, she said, picking up the wooden hawk. The last item to be packed, the first to be unpacked in her temporary lodging near the property. As she closed the door behind her, Zoe felt not the pang of leaving she had expected, but the quiet exhilaration of moving toward something true. The journey back to the mountains lay ahead, not as a lost traveler this time, but as someone returning with purpose. Whether that purpose would include reconnecting with the man who had catalyzed her transformation remained to be seen. For now, it was enough to know she was following a path that felt right, one careful step at a time. Like splitting wood, Zoe thought with a smile as the elevator descended, one log at a time. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Zoe's new SUV, a practical, rugged vehicle that had replaced her sleek city sedan. Spring had arrived in the Cascades, melting the last vestiges of winter snow and painting the mountainsides with wildflowers. 6 months had passed since her fateful encounter with Ethan Blackwood, 3 since she had purchased the adjacent property. In that time, her vision had begun to materialize with surprising speed. She parked beside the modest cabin she'd constructed as her temporary home while the retreat center took shape. Unlike Ethan's handcrafted dwelling, hers had been built by local contractors, though she'd insisted on sustainable materials and minimal disruption to the surrounding forest. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a physical manifestation of her commitment to this new path. "Morning, boss," called Milo, the site foreman, as Zoe gathered her laptop and blueprints from the passenger seat. A former eco-builder from Portland, he had embraced her vision with unexpected enthusiasm, bringing expertise in sustainable construction that had refined her initial plans. "Morning, Milo. How's the main lodge coming along?" "On schedule, believe it or not." That reclaimed timber you sourced is working out beautifully." He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the construction site. "Those solar engineers are coming today to finalize the array placement." The land was coming alive, not just with the natural rebirth of spring, but with purposeful human activity. Where once there had been only untouched forest, carefully selected clearings now housed the emerging structures of Clarity Wilderness Retreat. The main lodge, 5 individual cabins, a workshop space, and a meditation pavilion overlooking a small lake, each designed to blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. They crested a small rise, and the full expanse of the project came into view. Workers moved with purpose across the site, the rhythm of hammers and the occasional whine of a saw breaking the mountain silence. Zoe felt the familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that had become her constant companion. Pride in what they were creating, anxiety about whether she was honoring the land properly in the process. "You've got that look again," Milo observed, his weathered face creasing with understanding. "The, am I doing the right thing look." Zoe smiled ruefully. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's had the same doubts." He gestured toward the construction. "What we're building here, it's different, respectful. It's giving people access to this place, without destroying what makes it special. That matters." His reassurance helped, as it always did. Milo had become more than an employee. He was a mentor of sorts, guiding her through the practical aspects of mountain living that Ethan had only begun to teach her during those 3 transformative days. "Any word from the neighbor?" Milo asked casually as they approached the site office, a repurposed shipping container painted to blend with the forest. Zoe shook her head. The question that everyone seemed to ask, yet the answer remained unchanged. Despite the construction activity less than a mile from his property, Ethan Blackwood had made no contact. Whether he was aware of her presence or the nature of the project remained a mystery that Zoe had not found the courage to solve directly. "His choice," she said simply, though the words held more complicated emotions than she cared to examine. Inside the site office, the day's work began in earnest. Meetings with contractors, decisions about materials, review of the marketing materials Katie was developing back in Seattle. The design studio continued to operate under Michael's capable leadership, its focus shifting gradually toward clients whose values aligned with Zoe's evolving vision. Meanwhile, the retreat center had become her primary focus, consuming her days and often her nights as well. By late afternoon, Zoe found herself alone in the office, poring over applications for the first positions she would need to fill: wilderness guides, a chef committed to local sourcing, a program director to help shape the experiences they would offer. The stack of resumes was impressive, suggesting her vision resonated with others seeking meaningful work. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "We're finishing up for the day," Milo said, poking his head in. "You should too. Perfect evening for that hike you've been putting off." The gentle prodding made Zoe smile. Milo had appointed himself unofficial guardian of her work-life balance, regularly reminding her that connecting with the land was supposedly the point of this entire endeavor. "You sound like my assistant back in Seattle," she commented, but began gathering her things nonetheless. "Smart woman, your assistant." Milo tipped his hat before disappearing, leaving Zoe to contemplate the suggestion. The hike he referred to was one she had mapped out weeks ago but never found time to complete, a trail that would connect her property to the public lands beyond, passing near, but not intruding upon Ethan's territory. Its purpose was practical, providing an access point for more adventurous retreat guests, but its proximity to Ethan's cabin was not entirely coincidental, though Zoe had never admitted as much aloud. The evening was indeed perfect, warm for spring, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Zoe changed into hiking clothes, packed water and trail mix, and set out with a topographical map and compass. Her wilderness skills had improved dramatically over the months, though she maintained a healthy respect for the mountain's capacity to disorient even experienced hikers. The trail began clearly enough, following a natural ridgeline before descending into a valley lush with new growth. Zoe moved at a steady pace, her body stronger now from months of physical work and regular hikes. Where once she had panted and struggled on mountain paths, she now found a rhythm that felt almost meditative, her mind clearing as her muscles worked. An hour into the hike, she reached a fork not marked on her map. Both paths appeared equally established, winding through the dense forest in different directions. Zoe consulted her compass, attempting to determine which route would best serve her intended connection to the public trail system. A sound behind her, the snap of a twig perhaps, or the rustle of underbrush, made her turn sharply, hand instinctively moving to the bear spray attached to her belt. 6 months in the mountains had taught her to be alert to wildlife, particularly in spring when hungry predators emerged from winter dormancy. Instead of a bear or mountain lion, however, she found herself facing Ethan Blackwood. He stood several yards away, as if giving her space to process his sudden appearance. He looked much as she remembered. Tall and solid in worn hiking clothes, his beard perhaps a bit more silver than before, but it was his eyes that caught and held her. Those pine resin eyes that had assessed her so carefully that stormy night, now regarding her with an unreadable expression. "You're on my land," he said finally, his deep voice sending an unexpected wave of emotion through her. Not anger or accusation in his tone, simply statement of fact. Zoe glanced at her map, then back at him, confusion evident. "I thought the property line was half a mile east." "It is. You crossed it about 20 minutes ago." Embarrassment heated her cheeks. For all her improved navigation skills, she had still managed to trespass unintentionally. "I'm sorry. The fork in the trail confused me." Ethan nodded, accepting her explanation. Trail markers fade over winter, need repainting come spring. A pause then. "You've been busy." The simple observation confirmed what she had suspected. He was aware of her presence, of the construction, of everything. Yet he had maintained his distance, watching but not engaging until now. "Yes." Zoe wasn't sure what else to say, how to compress 6 months of transformation into casual conversation on a forest path. "It's called Clarity Wilderness Retreat." A flicker of something crossed his features, recognition of the name's origin perhaps. "Ambitious project." "It is." Zoe took a breath, finding unexpected courage. "Would you like to see it? What we're building?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to voice. Ethan studied her for a long moment, as if gauging her motivations. "Why are you here, Zoe?" he asked finally. "Really here, not just on this trail." The directness of the question deserved equal honesty in return. "Because 3 days in your cabin changed everything I thought I knew about what matters. Because I couldn't go back to my old life pretending that hadn't happened. So you decided to build a business out of it." There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "Not just a business, a bridge." Zoe gestured vaguely toward the direction she had come from. "Between the world I left and the world you showed me. A place where others might find what I found here." Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "And what was that exactly?" "Clarity," Zoe said simply. "About who I am beneath all the noise. About what actually matters." He nodded slowly, as if her answer satisfied some internal question. "The Eastern Fork," he said, gesturing toward the path on the right. "That's the one you want. Connects to the public trail about 2 miles ahead." The abrupt return to practicalities caught Zoe off guard. Was this dismissal? Acceptance? Something in between? "Thank you." She hesitated, unwilling to end the encounter so soon. "The invitation stands. If you ever want to see what we're creating, I might take you up on that." Ethan adjusted his hat, his gaze moving beyond her to the lengthening shadows. "Getting late. You should head back before dark." "I know my way now," Zoe assured him, though she recognized the genuine concern behind his words. Still, his eyes returned to hers, holding for a moment longer than necessary. "Mountains don't care how well you think you know them. They change on you." The warning, or perhaps it was advice, echoed in Zoe's mind as she retraced her steps toward her cabin. Their brief encounter had left her with more questions than answers, yet somehow lighter, as if a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged had begun to ease. He knew she was there. He hadn't objected. And, most importantly, he hadn't dismissed her project outright. For now, that would have to be enough. The following weeks brought accelerated progress on the retreat center. With the main structures framed and roofed, interior work began in earnest. Zoe found herself making dozens of decisions daily, everything from sustainable insulation materials to the hand-woven textiles that would furnish the guest cabins. Through it all, she watched the eastern trail for signs of Ethan, but he did not appear. Occasionally, she thought she glimpsed a figure on the ridgeline overlooking the construction site, but distance made certainty impossible. If he was observing the project's development, he was doing so from a careful remove. One morning in late spring, Zoe arrived at the site to find Milo engaged in conversation with a stranger, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Zoe immediately of someone she couldn't quite place. "Ms. Matthews," Milo called, waving her over. "This is Dr. Kathleen Blackwood." She was asking about employment opportunities. Blackwood, the surname registered immediately, connecting with Ethan's mention of a sister who practiced law. But he had said she was in Billings, and this woman had introduced herself as Dr. Kathleen Blackwood, the woman confirmed, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. "Ethan's sister. But I'm guessing you've already made that connection." "I didn't realize Ethan had two sisters," Zoe said, trying to reconcile this new information. Kathleen smiled slightly. "Just the one. I practiced family law for 20 years before returning to my first love, wilderness therapy. Ph.D. in ecopsychology from the University of Montana." Understanding dawned. "You're a therapist who uses nature as part of the healing process." Oversimplified, but essentially correct. Kathleen glanced toward the construction site. "Ethan mentioned what you're building here, said it might align with my interests." Ethan had mentioned her project, had spoken of it positively enough that his sister had driven what must be considerable distance to investigate in person. The knowledge sent a warm current through Zoe's chest. "I'd be happy to show you around," she offered, "and tell you more about our vision." The tour that followed was unlike any Zoe had given before. Where others required extensive explanation of the retreat's purpose, Kathleen seemed to grasp intuitively what Zoe was attempting to create. Her questions were incisive, focusing on program development and the specific transformational experiences the retreat would offer. Most places like this focus too much on luxury and not enough on genuine challenge, Kathleen observed, as they stood on the partially completed deck of the main lodge. People need to be uncomfortable enough to grow, but not so uncomfortable they shut down. Exactly, Zoe. Agreed, surprised, and pleased by the insight. We want to provide enough support that people feel safe, but not so much that they miss the lessons the wilderness has to offer. Kathleen nodded approvingly. And your background in design, that's an interesting foundation for this work. I'm learning as I go, Zoe admitted. That's why I'm looking to bring on experts in wilderness education, in sustainable living, and in helping people reconnect with themselves through nature. Kathleen finished for her, which is precisely my specialty. The conversation that followed felt less like a job interview and more like a meeting of aligned minds. By the time they returned to the site office for coffee, Zoe had little doubt that Kathleen Blackwood was exactly the program director clarity needed. Someone who understood both the psychological aspects of transformation and the specific power of wilderness to facilitate it. "I should tell you," Kathleen said as their discussion wound down, "that Ethan was reluctant to mention your project to me. My brother values his privacy above almost everything." "I've noticed," Zoe said dryly. A smile touched Kathleen's lips. "But the fact that he did mention it, and spoke of you in particular, suggests he sees something of value here. Ethan doesn't offer praise lightly." "He spoke of me?" Zoe tried to keep her tone casual, though she suspected Kathleen missed very little. "He said you understood something essential about this place that most outsiders miss." Kathleen studied Zoe with the same penetrating gaze her brother possessed. "He also said you split wood properly, which might be the highest compliment he's capable of giving." The observation drew unexpected laughter from Zoe, releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "I had a good teacher for about 3 days. Sometimes that's all it takes." Kathleen's expression grew more serious. "When the student is ready and the lesson is right, The conversation shifted back to practical matters: compensation, living arrangements, program development timelines. By its conclusion, they had reached an understanding that Kathleen would join the Clarity team as program director, bringing her considerable expertise to shape the retreat's offerings. As they walked to Kathleen's vehicle, a practical SUV not unlike Zoe's own, a final question presented itself. "Does Ethan know you came here today?" Kathleen considered the question as she opened her car door. "My brother and I respect each other's independence. I don't need his permission to explore opportunities that interest me." "That's not what I asked," Zoe pointed out gently. A smile flickered across Kathleen's face. "No, it isn't." She settled into the driver's seat. "I'll be in touch about those program outlines we discussed." "And Zoe?" "The Eastern Trail is particularly beautiful at sunrise." With that cryptic parting comment, she drove away, leaving Zoe to puzzle over its meaning as she returned to the day's work. 2 mornings later, following what might have been intuition or simply curiosity about Kathleen's remark, Zoe rose before dawn and made her way to the Eastern Trail. The forest was different in these early hours, hushed and expectant, wrapped in a pearly mist that softened its edges. She moved quietly along the path, stopping when she reached the fork where she had encountered Ethan. This time, she deliberately took the eastern branch, climbing steadily as the first hints of sunrise began to warm the horizon. The trail emerged eventually onto a rocky outcropping that offered a spectacular view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. Zoe paused, breath-catching at the beauty unfolding before her. Bands of gold and rose spreading across the sky, burning away the mist to reveal the forested landscape in all its glory. "Worth the early wake-up, isn't it?" She turned to find Ethan seated on a flat rock several yards away, a thermos beside him. Unlike their previous encounter, his presence seemed planned rather than coincidental. "It's incredible," Zoe agreed, making no move to close the distance between them, sensing he had chosen this moment and place with deliberation. "My sister is joining your project," he stated, neither question nor accusation. "As program director, yes." Zoe watched him carefully. "Does that concern you?" Ethan considered the question, his gaze on the unfolding sunrise. "Kathleen makes her own choices. Always has. But the retreat's proximity to your land, to your solitude. If I minded neighbors, I'd have said something when you started clearing land 3 months ago." He looked at her directly then, his expression unreadable. "I've watched what you're building, Zoe. It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Quote, "Luxury cabins, hot tubs on decks, city people playing at wilderness without actually engaging with it." The assessment was fair enough. Such developments were common in areas of natural beauty, capitalizing on the scenery without honoring its essence. "And what do you see instead?" Zoe asked, genuinely curious about his perception of her vision. Ethan gestured toward the valley where the emerging sunlight now illuminated the retreat center structures. Nestled among the trees rather than dominating them. Respect. For the land, for what it can teach. Buildings that belong where they're placed. The observation, the closest thing to approval she had received from him, warmed Zoe more than the strengthening sunlight. "That's what I'm trying for," she acknowledged, "though I still have a lot to learn. Learning's not a destination, it's a practice." Ethan rose, picking up his thermos. "Like splitting wood." A smile tugged at Zoe's lips at the callback to their shared experience. "One log at a time?" Exactly. The moment stretched between them, waited with unspoken possibility. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that caught the morning light. "Trail markers," he said, holding out a handful of metal tags painted bright blue. "For the fork, so people don't get lost." Zoe accepted the offering, understanding its significance beyond the practical purpose. A gesture of acceptance, perhaps even support, for what she was creating. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan nodded once, then turned to go. He paused after a few steps, looking back at her. "The retreat opens in a month?" 6 weeks, Zoe corrected. "We're still finishing interiors, hiring staff, developing programs." He seemed to consider this information carefully. "Might stop by? See how it's turning out?" The casual comment, delivered with studied nonchalance, belied its importance. An overture, however small, toward engagement rather than continued distance. "I'd like that," Zoe replied, matching his tone while holding his gaze. With a final nod, Ethan continued down the trail, disappearing among the trees as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. Zoe remained on the outcropping, the trail markers warm in her palm, watching as the day fully awakened around her. Below, the retreat center caught the morning light, its structures emerging from shadow into clarity, much like the vision that had brought her back to these mountains. The journey was far from complete. Challenges remained practical, financial, personal. But in this moment, watching sunlight transform the landscape she had come to love, Zoe felt a certainty that had eluded her for most of her adult life. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and perhaps most surprisingly, she was not alone in recognizing the rightness of this path. With renewed purpose, Zoe pocketed the trail markers and began her descent, already mentally planning where they would be most visible to guide future hikers. One small act of caretaking for the land that had, in its own way, saved her. Like so many things in her new life, it was both practical and symbolic. A tangible step toward creating something that mattered, one mindful choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.